Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a world unlike any other. Imagine stepping into the heart of an ancient empire, where water and land seamlessly blend together in an intricate dance of survival. Picture yourself on a lush, green island, surrounded by floating gardens teeming with life. Corn, beans, and squash grow from beds of water, an engineering marvel crafted by the hands of the Aztecs. Welcome to the Chinampas. It's an incredible, floating farming system that helped sustain the Aztec Empire. And it's probably nothing like what you imagine when you think of ancient agriculture. You might even say that you probably wouldn't survive a day in this environment. But don't worry, we'll take it slow. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and while you're at it, why not post your location and local time in the comments? I'm always curious where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Aztecs. This fascinating, ancient civilization rose to power in what's now Mexico, and it's easy to picture them on land, maybe in vast cities with towering temples, surrounded by markets and warriors. But here's the kicker. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, wasn't actually on land at all. The city was situated right on a massive lake called Lake Texcoco, which, at the time, was part of a complex system of interconnected waterways. Imagine a Venice, but on a much grander scale. Thousands of people living on islands, connected by canals and causeways. Living on water presents challenges that most of us can't even fathom. But the Aztecs were experts in adapting to their environment. One of their most brilliant innovations was the Chinampa system. These floating gardens weren't just a farming technique, they were the lifeblood of the Aztec economy. And it all started with the realization that they could grow food on water. What's even more mind-blowing is that they didn't just grow some food, they grew everything they needed. Crops, herbs, flowers, you name it. You're probably wondering, but how does that even work? How do you plant things on water? Well, let's rewind a bit and explore the origins of this mind-boggling agricultural breakthrough. Let's step back a moment and really picture this. Tenochtitlan, the heart of the Aztec Empire. Wasn't your typical ancient city? Instead of sprawling across dry land, it was built right on Lake Texcoco. The city was made up of islands that were connected by a series of canals, kind of like the Venice of ancient Mesoamerica. These canals weren't just for decoration or transport, they were essential to the life of the city. Picture boats gliding along the water, carrying goods, people, and food, while the city itself thrived on its watery foundation. It's almost impossible to imagine a city like Tenochtitlan today. The Aztecs built their capital around an intricate network of causeways, with wide, open plazas and grand temples at the center. And just beyond the stone walls of the city, more water, stretching out in every direction. The land around Tenochtitlan was marshy and flooded for much of the year. Yet the Aztecs managed to turn this wet, wild environment into a powerhouse of civilization. They needed to find a way to grow crops on this unstable, unpredictable terrain, and they did so by creating their famous Chinampas. The floating gardens weren't the first agricultural innovation the Aztecs introduced, but they were certainly the most remarkable. This technique allowed them to maximize the use of every inch of water, transforming the surface of Lake Texcoco into a highly productive farming landscape. At their peak, The Chinampas covered thousands of acres around the lake and produced everything from corn to chilies, beans to squash, essentially. All the foods that sustained the Aztec population. Now, it's easy to assume that the Aztecs just randomly threw some plants onto the water and hoped for the best. But the reality is far more sophisticated. The Chinampas were carefully designed, constructed, and maintained. It wasn't just about throwing some seeds into the water and crossing your fingers. No, this was a farming technique that blended nature and human ingenuity. In fact, historians still argue about how exactly the Aztecs managed to create such a complex system of canals and floating plots with the limited tools they had at the time. Some believe they used a kind of engineering knowledge passed down from earlier Mesoamerican cultures, while others argue the methods were entirely unique to the Aztecs. Whatever the answer, it's clear that the Chinampas were an agricultural marvel, one that would forever change the way farming was done in the region. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To truly understand how these floating gardens came to life, we need to dive deeper into the construction process. So, let's head back to the basics. How did they actually build these floating plots? And how did they survive on water? So, how did the Aztecs make these floating gardens actually float and thrive? Year after year, it wasn't some haphazard arrangement of random plants on a lake. No, the process was as intricate as the gardens themselves. The first step in constructing a chinampa was to select the perfect spot. They'd start by finding an area of the lake that was shallow enough for the gardens to remain stable, but deep enough to stay submerged during seasonal changes. Once they had the ideal location, they would begin the hard work of constructing the garden's foundation. The first thing the Aztecs did was gather materials. They used the lake's own resources, such as reeds, mud, and plant matter, to create what was essentially a floating platform. They'd begin by laying down a base of water plants, such as tule reeds, which grew in abundance around the lake. These reeds were then woven together into large mats that could support the weight of the soil and plants. Think of it like building a giant, floating sponge. This base of reeds would be covered in a layer of mud dredged from the bottom of the lake. As this muddy mixture settled, it would compact and form a solid platform, creating a natural, nutrient-rich bed for the crops. Once the foundation was set, the Aztecs would carefully plant their crops. But they didn't just scatter seeds randomly. They followed a specific method known as milpa, where they planted crops together in a way that benefited one another. Corn, beans, and squash were grown side by side, with each crop supporting the others in a sort of symbiotic relationship. The corn would grow tall and provide a structure for the beans to climb, while the beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, helping to nourish the corn and squash. Squash, in turn, grew low to the ground, providing shade for the soil and preventing weeds from taking over. It sounds like a beautiful system, doesn't it? But, of course, there were a lot of factors that could threaten the Chinampas. The Aztecs had to be constantly vigilant, ensuring that the water levels in the lake remained stable and that their floating gardens didn't wash away during storms or flooding. And they had to maintain the health of the soil, which could erode over time. To fix this, the Aztecs used a technique called recharging the Chinampas, where they would regularly dredge more mud from the lake and add it to the beds to replenish the nutrients. Despite these challenges, Chinampas were a resounding success. The Aztecs grew an astonishing variety of crops on their floating gardens, and they did it with a level of precision that's still the subject of debate among historians today. Some believe that the technique was purely the product of Aztec ingenuity, while others argue that it was inherited from earlier Mesoamerican civilizations, such as the Olmecs or the Toltecs. What's clear, however, is that the Chinampa system played a key role in the Aztec Empire's ability to feed its rapidly growing population and become one of the most powerful civilizations in the Americas. Now that we've covered how the gardens were built, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Why were these floating gardens so vital to the Aztecs? How did they fit into the broader economy? And why were they so essential for trade and survival? Let's take a look. Now that we understand how the Chinampas were built, it's time to talk about why they were so important to the Aztecs. These floating gardens weren't just a way to grow food. They were the backbone of the entire Aztec economy. Imagine the hustle and bustle of a market in Tenochtitlan. The streets were lined with traders, each offering goods from different parts of the empire. The bustling markets didn't just have exotic goods or luxurious artifacts. They were overflowing with food, and much of that food came from the Chinampas. The Aztecs were smart. They didn't just grow food for themselves. They created a system that allowed them to feed their growing population while also supporting trade. The Chinampas produced food year-round, which was essential for a city as large and dynamic as Tenochtitlan. Unlike traditional farming, which relied on seasonal cycles, the floating gardens were incredibly productive and could be harvested multiple times per year. This meant that the city didn't just survive, it thrived. And the Chinampas were a huge part of that success. But that's not all. The Aztecs also used their Chinampas to produce goods for trade. As the empire grew, so did its need for not just food, but also other resources. The Aztecs were savvy traders, and the Chinampas allowed them to produce items that could be bartered or sold. They grew crops that weren't just for local consumption, they were valuable in other parts of the empire too. For example, maize, corn, was a staple in the Aztec diet, but it was also used to make a variety of food products, such as tamales, tortillas, and drinks like atole and pulque. These products became highly sought after in neighboring regions, and Tenochtitlan's floating gardens helped meet this demand. But there's something even more fascinating about the way the Aztecs approached trade. Their economy was based on a complex system of bartering, where goods and services were exchanged for other goods and services rather than money. And Chinampa-grown food wasn't the only thing being traded. There were also goods like fish, flowers, and even live animals, all coming from the water-based agricultural system. It's estimated that by the time the Spanish arrived, Tenochtitlan had a population of around 200,000 people, and the city was supported by a massive network of Chinampas that stretched for miles around the lake. One of the most remarkable things about this system was its sustainability. The Aztecs didn't just grow food on floating gardens, they actively worked to make sure that their environment could continue to support them. Unlike many modern agricultural systems, which can deplete soil or require extensive irrigation, Chinampas were designed to be sustainable. The water in the lake helped fertilize the soil naturally, and the constant replenishment of organic material kept the land rich and productive. This made the Chinampas a perfect solution to the challenges of farming in a water-based environment. But what really set the Chinampas apart from other agricultural systems of the time was how they contributed to the overall social structure of the Aztec Empire. Farming wasn't just about food, it was about community, about connection to the land, and about maintaining the delicate balance of nature. We'll dive into how these floating gardens shaped the Aztec social structure and even influenced religious practices in the next section. As we dive deeper into the world of the Aztec chinampas, it's important to understand that these floating gardens weren't just agricultural marvels. They were integral to the very fabric of Aztec society. In a world where social status and class divisions were key to survival, the chinampas played a unique role in shaping how the Aztecs interacted with each other and with their environment. Farming wasn't just a means of sustenance, it was woven into their daily lives, their economy, and even their religious practices. To start, the chinampas themselves were often tied to specific family groups or communities. Each family or group would be responsible for maintaining their own plot of land, and this cultivated a sense of responsibility and connection to the land. It wasn't just about getting food. It was about taking care of the environment that provided for you. This sense of stewardship was key to the Aztecs' way of life. The floating gardens weren't just for survival. They were a symbol of their relationship with nature. Interestingly, the chinampas were also a central part of the Aztec social hierarchy. As you can imagine, the wealthiest individuals and high-ranking officials were often those who had access to the best plots of land. But unlike in many other civilizations, there was a sense of communal ownership in the chinampa system. The land was collectively managed, and while individual families worked their plots, they were also part of a larger network of farmers. The agricultural system relied on cooperation and mutual respect, and this helped create a balance between social classes. Everyone, no matter their rank, depended on the land for survival. And this shared responsibility ensured that even the lower classes had access to food, provided they put in the work. But the chinampas' influence didn't stop at the social level. It also had profound effects on religious practices. In Aztec society, the gods were believed to be deeply tied to the land and the earth's fertility. The Aztecs revered agricultural deities like Tlaloc, the god of rain, and Xicomacoatl, the goddess of agriculture. Farming, particularly the cultivation of corn, was seen as an offering to these gods. The act of planting and harvesting was considered a sacred ritual, and the chinampas were seen as a divine gift, an agricultural miracle that allowed the people to honor their gods through the work of their hands. Religious ceremonies were often held to mark the beginning of planting seasons and sacrifices, both of crops and sometimes animals, were made to ensure a bountiful harvest. The farmers who worked the chinampas weren't just growing food. They were part of a cycle of life, death, and rebirth, offering their labor to sustain not just the empire, but the cosmic order. In fact, some historians argue that the very design of the chinampas was a reflection of Aztec cosmology. The floating gardens represented a balance between earth and water, two elements that were sacred in Aztec belief. This balance, achieved through the careful construction of the chinampas, was seen as a way to honor the gods and maintain harmony between the human world and the natural world. Of course, not everything about the chinampas was spiritual or idealistic. The labor required to maintain the floating gardens was grueling. Working on the chinampas was no easy task. Farmers had to be constantly on the move, replenishing the soil, repairing the beds, managing the water levels, and ensuring the crops were well maintained. But despite these challenges, the work was often seen as a form of service to both the community and the gods. It's said that working the chinampas was an act of devotion, a way to earn favor from the gods and ensure prosperity for the family. All of this, the social structure, the religious connection, and the sheer hard work, made the chinampa system more than just a farming technique. It was a cornerstone of Aztec civilization, a method that allowed the Aztecs to thrive in a challenging environment to connect with each other, and to honor the gods. But as we know, nothing lasts forever. In the next section, we'll explore how the decline of the Chinampus began, how even this extraordinary agricultural system couldn't withstand the forces that were coming their way. The world of the Aztec Chinampus was extraordinary, but like all things, it couldn't last forever. The Aztecs had created a highly sustainable, advanced agricultural system, one that supported not just their empire's food needs, but also its economy, social structure, and religious beliefs. But as much as the Chinampus thrived, their fate was tied to the changing tides of history, particularly the arrival of the Spanish. When Hernán Cortés and his conquistadors arrived in the early 16th century, they encountered Tenochtitlan in its prime, a city of unimaginable beauty. With its floating gardens stretching across Lake Texcoco, the city was an impressive sight, with canals teeming with boats and chinampas full of crops that fed its population. But the Aztec Empire, despite its power and ingenuity, was about to face an enemy it couldn't easily overcome: the Spanish. One of the first challenges to the Chinampus came from the very nature of the Spanish conquest. The invaders were unfamiliar with the unique, water-based way of life the Aztecs had created. As the Spanish began their siege of Tenochtitlan in 1521, they cut off many of the causeways and canals, severing the lifelines that had sustained the city for centuries. With the city under siege, the floating gardens that had once flourished on the lake were soon destroyed. The canals became choked with debris, and the Chinampus were flooded and neglected. What had once been a thriving agricultural network quickly fell into disrepair. But the physical destruction wasn't the only threat to the Chinampus. As the Spanish gained control of the region, they brought with them new agricultural methods, ones that didn't rely on the floating gardens. The Spanish introduced European crops like wheat, barley, and sugarcane, which were easier to grow on solid land and required less maintenance than the Chinampus. Over time, these crops began to replace traditional Aztec staples, and many of the waterways that had once supported the Chinampus were drained or altered. The land that had been so carefully nurtured by the Aztecs was no longer able to support the ancient agricultural techniques. Another factor in the decline of the Chinampus was the spread of disease. Smallpox, which had been brought by the Spanish, decimated the native population. The loss of life was staggering, and many of the people who had maintained the Chinampus either died or were forced to abandon their lands. With the population of Tenochtitlan dwindling, the delicate balance required to sustain the Chinampus system became impossible to maintain. Historians still argue whether the fall of the Chinampus was inevitable. Some suggest that the arrival of the Spanish, with their foreign methods and diseases, was the final blow to the system. Others believe that the Chinampus may have eventually declined, even without the Spanish intervention, as urbanization and changing agricultural practices began to take their toll. What is clear, however, is that the destruction of the Chinampus marked the end of an era for the Aztec Empire. The floating gardens, once a symbol of their ingenuity and resilience, disappeared almost as quickly as they had appeared. But the story doesn't end there. Despite the fall of the Aztec Empire and the decline of the Chinampus, the legacy of these floating gardens wasn't completely lost. In fact, today, there are still pockets of Chinampa farming in the region around Mexico City. Though much smaller in scale, these modern Chinampas are a reminder of the extraordinary agricultural feats achieved by the Aztecs. In the next section, we'll take a closer look at how the Chinampa system has endured through the centuries, even after the destruction brought by the Spanish. despite the fall of the Aztec Empire. The Chinampa system didn't disappear completely. Over the centuries, the floating gardens slowly faded from the mainstream agricultural practices of the region. Yet they continued to survive in certain pockets, particularly around the area of Xochimilco, just south of modern-day Mexico City. In fact, Xochimilco is home to what's left of the Chinampas today, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a living relic of Aztec agricultural brilliance. How did these ancient farming methods persist? It's a testament to the resilience of the Chinampa system itself, and the deep connection between the local communities and the land. After the Spanish conquest, much of the region around Mexico City was reshaped, with the construction of new roads, buildings, and the draining of some of the lakes that supported the Chinampas. But the Xochimilco area, with its rich soil and relatively stable water levels, provided a refuge for the Chinampa technique. Local farmers, some of whom were descendants of the original Aztec communities, continued to practice the art of growing crops on floating beds, even in the face of modern pressures and technological advancements. Today, the Chinampas of Xochimilco serve as a fascinating example of how indigenous agricultural methods have adapted to survive in a rapidly changing world. These small floating plots are still cultivated with a variety of crops, everything from corn and beans to flowers and herbs. While the scale is much smaller than it once was, the technique remains largely the same, and it still relies on the same principles that the Aztecs used to create a thriving agricultural system on the waters of Lake Texcoco. One of the main reasons for the persistence of Chinampa farming in the Xochimilco region is its sustainability. Chinampas are a highly efficient and eco-friendly form of agriculture. They use the natural resources of the lake, and the techniques themselves allow the land to regenerate over time. Unlike modern industrial farming, which often depletes the soil and requires extensive use of chemical fertilizers, Chinampa farming works with nature. The water of the lake helps to nourish the plants, while the organic matter from the reeds and plants provides rich nutrients for the soil. It's a perfect example of how traditional methods can often be more sustainable than modern industrial approaches. In fact, the Chinampas have seen a resurgence in interest in recent years, especially as concerns over environmental sustainability and food security grow. Environmentalists and urban planners alike have started to recognize the value of these ancient farming techniques, seeing them as a way to reduce urban sprawl, increase green spaces, and promote local, organic food production. In some areas, Chinampas are being restored and revitalized, not just as a cultural heritage, but as a sustainable solution for modern agricultural challenges. However, despite these modern efforts, the Chinampas still face challenges. The growing urbanization of Mexico City continues to threaten the delicate balance that sustains the Chinampa system. The lakes have been slowly shrinking due to the expansion of the city, and pollution from modern developments has started to affect the water quality of the remaining canals. But there's hope. Local efforts to protect and preserve these ancient agricultural practices are ongoing. In some cases, community-driven initiatives have sought to protect the Chinampas, restore the waterways, and educate new generations of farmers about the benefits of this ancient system. Still, there's much to be done to secure the future of the Chinampas. Modern environmental and agricultural issues, such as water pollution and overdevelopment, continue to pose threats to this unique farming method. Yet, the resilience of the Chinampas speaks to something much larger: the power of human ingenuity and the deep connection between people and the land. Despite centuries of change, The floating gardens remain a symbol of the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the Aztecs, and they continue to offer valuable lessons for how we might balance modern life with environmental sustainability. Now, let's turn our attention to something else that has long fascinated historians: how the Aztecs created and maintained such an innovative agricultural system in the first place. How did they manage to develop these floating gardens? And why do some historians still debate the origins of the Chinampas? Let's dive into the mysteries of the Chinampa system and explore what we still don't fully understand about this extraordinary feat of engineering. As we marvel at the Chinampas and their remarkable persistence, there are still lingering questions surrounding how the Aztecs developed this ingenious agricultural system. Historians and archaeologists have spent decades trying to unravel the mystery of the floating gardens, how they were built, how they evolved, and whether they were entirely an Aztec innovation or the result of earlier Mesoamerican agricultural practices. In truth, there's still much we don't know, and the topic remains a subject of scholarly debate. The first and most obvious question is, how did the Aztecs come to create the Chinampas? While it's clear that the Chinampas were essential to the Aztec economy, the exact origins of the technique are still debated. Some historians believe that the idea of floating gardens may have been borrowed from earlier cultures, such as the Olmecs or the Toltecs, who also built on lake shores and may have experimented with water-based agriculture. These civilizations existed long before the Aztecs, and their agricultural practices could have influenced the development of Chinampa farming. However, there's very little concrete evidence to directly link these early cultures with the invention of the Chinampas. So, historians are left to wonder, did the Aztecs come up with this idea independently, or did they inherit it from a previous culture? Another mystery lies in how the Aztecs managed to construct and maintain such a complex system of floating gardens with the limited tools and technology available to them at the time. While we know they used natural materials, such as reeds, mud, and plants, it's still not entirely clear how they were able to engineer such a sophisticated system. The precision with which they created the Chinampas, from the careful layering of reeds and mud to the maintenance of the canals and water levels, suggests a highly advanced understanding of hydrology and agriculture. Some experts believe the Aztecs were the first to master the technique of dredging the lake bottom for mud to create the fertile soil needed for the crops, while others argue that this could have been a method passed down through generations of Mesoamerican farmers. Historians also continue to debate the size and scope of the Chinampa system. Estimates vary widely on how much of Lake Texcoco was covered by Chinampas at the height of the Aztec Empire. Some reports suggest that the Chinampas stretched for over 30 square miles, while others argue that the area may have been smaller. The question of scale is significant because it offers insight into how the Aztecs managed such a vast network of floating gardens, especially in a city like Tenochtitlan, which was surrounded by water on all sides. One of the more intriguing aspects of the Chinampas is how they were not just an agricultural system, but also a key part of Aztec military strategy. Some historians believe that the Chinampas were used for defense as well as farming. The waterway surrounding Tenochtitlan gave the Aztecs a unique advantage in times of conflict. They could use the canals to move swiftly through the city, and the floating gardens themselves may have provided a natural defense barrier, making it harder for invaders to access the city. Some argue that the Chinampas even played a role in the development of Aztec military technology, with the need to control water levels and defend the floating gardens fostering innovations in boats, weaponry, and tactics. But perhaps the greatest mystery surrounding the Chinampas is why they were so incredibly effective in supporting such a large population. Despite the challenges of farming on water, constant maintenance, water management, and unpredictable weather, the Chinampas allowed the Aztecs to produce food year-round. This is a feat that many modern farming systems still struggle to match. The question, then, isn't just how the Aztecs created the Chinampas, but how they made them so remarkably efficient. What was their secret? It's likely that a combination of factors, natural resources, community cooperation, and an intricate understanding of agriculture came together to make the Chinampas work. And while we may never fully understand every detail of how the Aztecs achieved this, what's clear is that the floating gardens were a symbol of their ingenuity, resilience, and connection to the land. In many ways, they represent the pinnacle of Aztec agricultural innovation, a perfect blend of nature and human ingenuity. As we move into the next section, let's reflect on the broader legacy of the Chinampas. Even though the system declined with the fall of the Aztec Empire, its influence can still be seen today. Let's explore how this ancient farming technique has persisted through history and what lessons we can draw from it in our modern world. The legacy of the Chinampas isn't confined to the past. Despite the fall of the Aztec Empire and centuries of urban expansion in Mexico City, the floating gardens have persisted in some form, providing a unique glimpse into the resilience of ancient agricultural methods. Even today, the Chinampas of Xochimilco, just south of Mexico City, are still actively cultivated, keeping alive the practices and techniques developed by the Aztecs more than 500 years ago. These modern Chinampas are far smaller in scale than their Aztec predecessors, but they are still a testament to the ingenuity of those ancient farmers and their ability to adapt to their environment. Why, in the face of modern agriculture, has the Chinampa system endured? The answer lies in the sustainability of the method itself. Chinampa farming works in harmony with the environment rather than exploiting it. Unlike conventional farming, which can deplete the soil over time, Chinampas maintain their fertility by continuously recycling organic material. The water in the canals helps to fertilize the soil naturally, while the roots of the plants growing in the floating gardens anchor the soil and prevent erosion. This creates a system that can continue to produce food for generations without the need for chemical fertilizers or extensive irrigation systems. In a world where modern agriculture is often criticized for its environmental impact, the Chinampa system offers a model of sustainability that many today are beginning to look to for inspiration. But the Chinampas of today are not without their challenges. Modern urbanization has encroached upon the ancient canals, and pollution from the growing city has contaminated the water. Furthermore, the once thriving Chinampa system is now much smaller, with only a fraction of the land still used for farming. However, local farmers and environmentalists are working hard to preserve and restore the Chinampa system. There are initiatives aimed at cleaning the canals, improving water quality, and educating the public about the value of this ancient technique. In fact, the restoration of the Chinampas has become a symbol of cultural pride and environmental conservation, showing that the wisdom of the past can still be relevant in the present. What makes the Chinampas particularly appealing today is their ability to provide local, organic food in urban areas, in a time when concerns about food security, climate change, and sustainable agriculture are more pressing than ever. The Chinampas offer a model of how cities can coexist with nature. Imagine a world where cities are not just centers of consumption, but places where food is grown within the urban landscape itself, where crops are cultivated in floating gardens that reduce the need for transportation, lower the carbon footprint, and provide fresh produce to local communities. This is the kind of future that Chinampa farming points to, where ancient wisdom meets modern needs. But the significance of the Chinampas extends beyond their agricultural benefits. They are also a symbol of resilience. Over the centuries, the Chinampas have withstood the challenges of war, disease, and urbanization. They remind us that even in the face of adversity, systems built on cooperation with nature can endure. The survival of the Chinampas is a testament to the strength and adaptability of indigenous agricultural practices. And it serves as a reminder that sometimes the answers to our most pressing challenges lie in the lessons of the past. The revival of Chinampa farming also opens up the possibility of reconnecting with our food systems in a more meaningful way. In a world where most people are disconnected from the origins of their food, the Chinampas offer a chance to reconnect with the land and understand the work that goes into producing what we eat. This connection, forged through the cultivation of crops on floating gardens, can foster a deeper appreciation for the environment and a more sustainable way of living. As we reflect on the enduring legacy of the Chinampas, it's clear that they are more than just a relic of the past. They are a living testament to the ingenuity of the Aztecs and a symbol of how ancient practices can continue to provide solutions for the challenges of the present. The Chinampas remind us that sustainability, resilience, and harmony with nature are not modern ideas, but ancient ones that have the power to shape our future. In the next section, we'll take a look at some of the mysteries surrounding the Chinampas that still remain unanswered. Despite the advancements in our understanding of Aztec agriculture, there are still many aspects of the Chinampa system that puzzle historians and scientists alike. What can we still learn from these ancient floating gardens? Let's explore. Even after centuries of study, there are still so many mysteries surrounding the Aztec Chinampas that keep historians, archaeologists, and agricultural experts fascinated. The marvel of these floating gardens lies not only in their design, but also in the depth of knowledge that went into their creation. Knowledge that we still struggle to fully understand. While we know a lot about how the Chinampas were built and maintained, there are still many unanswered questions that continue to intrigue scholars. One of the most significant mysteries is how the Aztecs managed to keep their Chinampas so productive over long periods of time. Today, modern farming practices are highly dependent on synthetic fertilizers and pesticides to maintain crop yields. In contrast, the Chinampas were created using only natural materials: reeds, mud, and lake plants. The success of this system in producing crops year-round, without depleting the soil, has led some historians to wonder whether the Aztecs possessed knowledge of soil science and ecology far beyond what we give them credit for. How did they balance the nutrients in the soil without the sophisticated tools and scientific understanding we have today? Was there a deeper, almost intuitive knowledge of the land and water systems that we've only begun to rediscover? Historians still debate the precise methods the Aztecs used to ensure the fertility of the Chinampas. Some believe that the key to the system's success was the constant replenishment of organic material from the lake, which naturally fertilized the soil and allowed for a continuous cycle of planting and harvesting. Others suggest that the Aztecs may have used a form of crop rotation or intercropping that allowed the soil to regenerate while maintaining a constant output of food. However, we still lack detailed evidence on how they manage this cycle. The mystery of the soil's fertility remains a point of contention, with some scholars even wondering whether the Chinampas were somehow self-sustaining in ways we don't yet understand. Another mystery that persists is the scale and extent of the Chinampa system. While estimates vary, it's believed that at the height of the Aztec Empire, The Chinampas of Lake Texcoco covered thousands of acres. But how did the Aztecs manage such a vast network of floating gardens, especially considering the limitations of their technology and labor force? Were there systematic techniques for expanding and managing the Chinampas on this scale? Some historians suggest that the Aztecs may have had an advanced organizational system, almost like a form of water-based urban planning, which allowed them to control the expansion and upkeep of the Chinampas with precision. Others argue that the expansion of the Chinampa system was more organic, with communities gradually constructing new plots as the city grew. We may never know the full extent of how the Aztecs managed this system, but the scale of their agricultural achievement is undeniably impressive. Perhaps one of the most enduring mysteries is how the Chinampas were able to support such a large urban population, even under challenging conditions. Tenochtitlan, at its peak, had an estimated population of over 200,000 people. With such a large population to feed, the Chinampas would have had to operate at maximum efficiency. But what was the system of labor behind this? How did the Aztecs coordinate the work of so many people to maintain and harvest from the Chinampas? While we know that the Chinampas were worked by families and communities, with each group responsible for a particular plot, the precise organization of this labor remains unclear. Did the Aztecs have a formal system of labor management for the Chinampas? Or was it more decentralized? Another area of debate revolves around the role of the Chinampas in the Aztec military strategy. As we mentioned earlier, the waterways surrounding Tenochtitlan provided the city with a natural defense, but the Chinampas themselves may have had a strategic military role. Historians still argue whether the floating gardens were used as a form of fortification or if they were simply part of the city's larger defensive system. Some believe the canals and Chinampas acted as barriers to enemy forces, making it difficult for invaders to reach the city. Others suggest that the ability to move swiftly through the canals provided the Aztecs with an advantage during military campaigns. It's possible that the Chinampas served multiple purposes, both as a source of food and as a military asset. But we may never fully understand how they fit into the Aztec military strategy. Finally, there's the question of how the Spanish encountered the Chinampas when they arrived in the 16th century. The Spanish chroniclers described Tenochtitlan as a grand city, with its floating gardens and bustling canals. But the accounts often mix awe with disbelief, making it hard to tell just how much they understood about the Chinampa system. How did the Spanish view the floating gardens? Did they recognize them as a highly sophisticated and effective farming method? Or were they just another oddity in a city full of strange sights? The question of the Spanish perspective on the Chinampas is still debated, with some suggesting that the Europeans were so captivated by Tenochtitlan's grandeur that they may have overlooked or misunderstood the true value of the Chinampas. While we may never solve all the mysteries of the Chinampas, it's clear that they represent one of the most remarkable agricultural achievements in human history. The floating gardens are a symbol of the Aztecs' ingenuity and their deep connection to the land and water. In the next section, we'll wrap up our journey through the history of the Chinampas, reflecting on their enduring legacy and the lessons we can still learn from this ancient agricultural practice. As we approach the final chapters of this story, it's time to reflect on the profound legacy of the Chinampas, the floating gardens of the Aztecs. The ingenuity, resilience, and sustainability behind these agricultural systems are not just a testament to the brilliance of the Aztec Empire, but also to the enduring value of ancient knowledge in the modern world. While the Aztec civilization may have fallen centuries ago, their approach to farming, their relationship with nature, and their methods for sustaining large populations still offer lessons that we can apply today. One of the most compelling aspects of the Chinampa system is its sustainability. The Aztecs, in their quest to feed their growing population, crafted a farming method that was in harmony with the environment. It wasn't a system that depleted the land or required constant external inputs like modern agriculture. It was a closed-loop system that nurtured the soil, the water, and the crops. The Chinampas were designed to work with the natural flow of water, using the nutrients from the lake to sustain the crops. This method of farming is incredibly relevant today, as we face growing concerns about the environmental impact of industrial agriculture, soil degradation, water waste, and over-reliance on chemical fertilizers. The Chinampa system offers a timeless model of sustainable farming, where the needs of both the land and the people are met in balance. But beyond the sustainability, the Chinampas also stand as a symbol of human ingenuity. In an age where technology often seems to outpace our ability to understand its consequences, the Aztecs were able to create an agricultural system that was not only sophisticated, but incredibly efficient. They worked with the materials they had at hand, using simple tools but applying them with such precision that they transformed a challenging environment, waterlogged and prone to flooding, into a productive, thriving agricultural landscape. There's something almost poetic about this. The Aztecs didn't fight the water. They adapted to it, turning a potentially hostile environment into one of the most advanced farming systems of its time. In this way, the Chinampas remind us of the power of adaptability and innovation in the face of challenges. As we look to the future, the lessons of the Chinampas seem more relevant than ever. Urbanization, climate change, and the degradation of natural resources are some of the greatest challenges we face today. But what if we could rethink our approach to agriculture in the way the Aztecs did, by working with nature rather than against it? Could we build urban farms that mimic the principles of the Chinampas, using small spaces, water resources, and organic materials to produce food sustainably? Could cities become centers of food production, not just consumption? The restoration of the Chinampas in places like Xochimilco shows that it's possible to bring ancient agricultural practices back to life and adapt them for modern use. These floating gardens may very well hold the key to solving some of the pressing issues facing our urban centers. But the legacy of the Chinampas isn't just about agriculture. It's also about community. The Chinampa system was deeply tied to the social structure of the Aztec Empire. Each floating garden was tended by families or communities, working together to produce food not only for themselves, but for the larger society. The system fostered cooperation and shared responsibility, values that are often lost in today's individualistic world. In a way, the Chinampas represent a kind of agricultural democracy, where everyone had a stake in the success of the system and the survival of the community. In today's world, where divisions often run deep, the Chinampas remind us of the importance of working together, of shared responsibility for the well-being of the earth and each other. As we reflect on this journey through the history of the Chinampas, it's impossible not to feel a sense of awe at what the Aztecs were able to achieve. They built a system of farming that was not only practical, but also symbolic of their relationship with the environment, their gods, and each other. The Chinampas were more than just agricultural plots. They were a way of life, a testament to the interconnectedness of all things. They showed how a society could thrive by working in harmony with the land and water, and how a simple yet profound agricultural practice could sustain a civilization for centuries. In the end, The story of the Chinampas is one of resilience. It's a story of a people who, despite the odds, managed to adapt to their environment and create something lasting. Something that continues to inspire us even today. It's a reminder that the wisdom of the past is not only valuable, it is essential. The floating gardens of the Aztecs have survived the ravages of time, and they will continue to inspire future generations who are willing to look to the past for solutions to the problems of the present. So as we close out tonight's journey, let's take a moment to reflect on the lessons we can learn from the Aztecs and the floating gardens they created that changed the world. As we draw closer to the end of this journey through the Aztec floating gardens, it's important to take a step back and consider the lasting impact these gardens had. Not just on the Aztec Empire, but on the world at large. The Chinampas, while not widely known outside of Mesoamerican circles until recently, represent one of the most innovative agricultural systems in history. And while they may have been abandoned centuries ago, the principles behind them are more relevant than ever. The enduring relevance of the Chinampa system in modern times is perhaps its most powerful legacy. In the face of contemporary environmental crises, such as climate change, soil erosion, and food insecurity, the Chinampas offer a valuable model for how we might work in harmony with the earth rather than constantly exploiting it. The Aztecs' ability to grow food on water, without the need for synthetic fertilizers or excessive irrigation, speaks to the potential of water-based farming techniques in a time when arable land is increasingly scarce. In fact, there has been a recent resurgence of interest in the Chinampa system, with several groups working to revive the practice in the Xochimilco region near Mexico City. These modern Chinampas, while on a much smaller scale than the vast system of floating gardens that once surrounded Tenochtitlan, serve as a beacon of sustainable agriculture. These revival efforts reflect a growing recognition that the solutions to some of the world's most pressing environmental and food security challenges may lie not in modern technologies, but in the ancient wisdom of civilizations like the Aztecs. The question of sustainability is critical today. Modern industrial agriculture has done much to meet the food demands of an ever-growing global population, but it has also left a trail of environmental destruction in its wake. From the depletion of soil to the contamination of water supplies, the cost of feeding the world with current farming methods is unsustainable. The Chinampas, in contrast, worked in cooperation with the environment, using natural processes to maintain soil fertility and ensure a continuous harvest. In an era when so many agricultural systems are at risk of collapse, the Chinampas offer hope, an ancient, natural solution that could be adapted for today's world. What makes the Chinampas so remarkable isn't just the way they were designed, but the philosophy behind them. The Aztecs didn't view agriculture as a mere means of survival. They saw it as a sacred duty to the earth and the gods. Every planting season was marked by rituals honoring Tlaloc, the god of rain, and Chicomecoatl, the goddess of agriculture. The act of planting and harvesting was seen as a reciprocal relationship between the people, the gods, and the earth itself. This deep spiritual connection to the land infused the Chinampa system with a sense of responsibility and respect that is often absent in modern farming practices. The Aztecs understood that their survival depended on the balance between nature and society, and their agricultural system reflected this understanding. This spiritual and ecological balance is something we could learn from today, in a world dominated by profit-driven industries and rapid technological advancement. The value of sustainability and community can sometimes be overlooked. Yet, The Aztecs, through the Chinampas, show us that we can live in harmony with nature while thriving. The spiritual dimension of the Chinampas is not just about religion, but about a holistic approach to life, where people are not separate from the environment, but deeply interconnected with it. If we could approach agriculture and the environment with the same respect, perhaps we could build a future that doesn't just survive, but flourishes. Another important lesson the Chinampas teach us is the idea of community-based agriculture. The system was not just about feeding the individual, but feeding the entire community. Families worked together to create and maintain the floating gardens, and the produce grown on the Chinampas was shared among the people. This community aspect ensured that everyone had access to food, and it created a sense of shared responsibility for the well-being of the community and the environment. In today's world, where so much of our food is grown far from where it's consumed, the Chinampas remind us of the importance of local food systems. By reconnecting with where our food comes from and how it's produced, we can build stronger communities and more resilient food networks. The revival of Chinampa farming in modern times, particularly in Xochimilco, is more than just an effort to preserve an ancient tradition. It's a conscious attempt to reclaim the wisdom of the past in order to address the challenges of the future. And while these modern Chinampas may not feed an empire like the Aztecs once did, they provide a powerful example of how ancient agricultural techniques can be adapted and modernized to fit today's needs. As we wrap up tonight's journey, I hope you'll carry with you the profound lessons of the Chinampas. These floating gardens, crafted with ancient knowledge and a deep respect for nature, continue to inspire and challenge us today. They remind us that sustainability, community, and harmony with the earth are not just ideals, but practical solutions that have stood the test of time. And as we face our own challenges in the modern world, maybe it's time we look to the past for a little guidance. The Chinampas, once the lifeblood of the Aztec Empire, continue to teach us how we can live in balance with nature and how we might create a future that, like those floating gardens, thrives against all odds. As we come to the final stretch of our exploration into the floating gardens of the Aztecs, it's time to take a step back and consider what we've learned from these remarkable agricultural systems and how they relate to our lives today. The Chinampas were not just a method of farming. They were a testament to the human capacity to innovate and adapt. They represent the extraordinary ingenuity of a civilization that thrived on a challenging environment by working with nature, not against it. The more we study the Chinampas, the more we realize that the principles they embody can offer valuable solutions to the challenges we face today, particularly when it comes to food production, sustainability, and our relationship with the natural world. The resurgence of interest in Chinampa farming is a sign that the lessons of the past are being revisited. Today, in a world where urban sprawl continues to expand and environmental concerns mount, the Chinampa system offers an alternative to the conventional, often destructive practices of modern agriculture. By harnessing the principles of water-based farming and using natural resources like reeds and mud, the Chinampas demonstrate that food production doesn't have to come at the expense of the environment. Instead, it can coexist with nature in a way that sustains both people and the planet. But the revival of the Chinampas is not just about food production. It's also about cultural preservation. The Chinampas are more than an agricultural technique. They are a part of the Aztec legacy, a reminder of the deep connection the Aztecs had with the land. Revitalizing this ancient practice is not just about growing crops. It's about preserving a piece of history and a way of life that once thrived in harmony with the natural world. By keeping the Chinampas alive, we ensure that the wisdom of the past isn't lost. And perhaps, just as importantly, we remind ourselves that human ingenuity has always had the capacity to create sustainable systems, even in the most challenging of environments. The Chinampas also stand as a testament to the importance of community. The process of creating and maintaining these floating gardens required cooperation. Families and entire communities worked together to tend to their plots, share resources, and ensure that the gardens thrived. This sense of collective responsibility is something that's often missing in today's individualistic society. The Chinampas teach us that sustainable food systems don't just require innovation, they require collaboration. Whether in farming or in other areas of life, the success of a system depends on the strength of the community that supports it. In a world where social connections often feel fractured, the model of the Chinampas offers a powerful reminder of how working together can help us achieve something greater than the sum of its parts. As we think about the future, the lessons of the Chinampas are more important than ever. The world's population continues to grow, and the pressures on the environment are intensifying. Urban centers are expanding at an unprecedented rate, and the demand for food is constantly increasing. But if we look to the Chinampas, we can see that solutions to these challenges exist. Not in the high-tech solutions that often dominate the conversation, but in the simple, sustainable practices of the past. The floating gardens of the Aztecs were an answer to the problem of feeding a large urban population in a difficult environment. And while the world may be very different today, the principles behind the Chinampas, using natural resources wisely, working in harmony with nature, and fostering a sense of community, are timeless. We are entering an era where innovation and sustainability must go hand in hand. The revival of ancient practices like Chinampa farming isn't just about nostalgia. It's about learning from the past and applying those lessons to our modern world. By looking at systems that have stood the test of time, we can find inspiration for the challenges we face today. The Chinampas show us that sustainable food production is not only possible, but has been possible for thousands of years. The key is to work with nature, to understand the ecosystems that support us, and to cultivate systems that nurture the environment rather than depleting it. As we close our journey through the world of the Aztec floating gardens, we carry with us more than just a story of an ancient civilization. We carry the principles of sustainability, community, and respect for the land, principles that can guide us in the years ahead. The Chinampas are a reminder that even in the most difficult circumstances, humans have the capacity to innovate in ways that benefit both people and the planet. It's up to us to continue that legacy, to take the wisdom of the past and apply it to the future. So, as you settle down tonight, think about the legacy of the Chinampas. Think about how they represent a balance between nature and humanity, how they remind us that we can live in harmony with the earth, and that ancient knowledge still holds the keys to a sustainable future. Perhaps, just perhaps, it's time for all of us to look to the past for solutions to the challenges of tomorrow. As we wind down from our journey into the floating gardens of the Aztecs, it's time to reflect on everything we've discovered about this incredible agricultural system and its enduring legacy. The Chinampas were not just about growing food, they were about ingenuity, sustainability, community, and a profound connection to the earth. Despite the challenges and the forces of time, this ancient farming technique continues to inspire, and its lessons resonate with us now more than ever. The revival of the Chinampas in modern-day Xochimilco and other regions is a testament to the lasting impact of this system. In a world increasingly concerned with sustainability and environmental balance, the Chinampas offer a powerful example of how humanity can live in harmony with nature. We've learned that the Aztecs' ability to use water as a farming tool wasn't just an adaptation. It was a mastery of their environment that allowed them to create something sustainable and incredibly productive. The Chinampas were a model of ecological balance, where every part of the system, the water, the soil, and the crops, worked together in harmony. As we reflect on the lessons of the Chinampas, we realize that many of the challenges we face today, environmental degradation, food security, and the need for sustainable agriculture, are not new. The Aztecs faced similar challenges in their time, yet their solution was not just innovative. It was sustainable. Their methods didn't deplete the earth. They nurtured it. They understood the delicate balance between human needs and the natural world. And in that understanding, they created something that lasted for centuries. Today, we're in a position to apply those lessons in our own fight for a more sustainable future. The principles of the Chinampas are timeless, offering a blueprint for how we might approach agriculture in a way that nourishes the planet as well as its people. But the Chinampas offer more than just agricultural wisdom. They also provide a lesson in resilience. The floating gardens were born out of necessity. They were a response to the challenges of living in a watery world. But their success wasn't just about overcoming adversity. It was about thriving in the face of it. The Aztecs were able to turn a challenging environment into a thriving, productive landscape. In the same way, we can look at the challenges facing our world today: climate change, urbanization, food scarcity, and ask ourselves how we can adapt. Like the Chinampas, the solutions may not be simple, but they may already be rooted in our past, waiting to be rediscovered and reimagined for the future. The power of the Chinampas also lies in their community-driven nature. The Aztecs didn't just build floating gardens for individual gain. They built them as a shared resource, a common good that nourished the entire society. This sense of collective responsibility is something we could all learn from today. In an increasingly individualistic world, the Chinampas remind us that our collective well-being is tied to the health of the environment and the strength of the communities we build. Agriculture, like so many other aspects of life, is about cooperation. It's about working together, not just for the benefit of one person or one family, but for the benefit of everyone. As we look to the future, the Chinampas offer hope. They show us that it's possible to live in harmony with the earth and still thrive. They teach us that sustainability doesn't have to mean sacrifice. It can mean innovation and ingenuity. And most importantly, they remind us that we are not separate from nature. We are a part of it. The legacy of the Chinampas is not just an agricultural achievement. It's a lesson in how we can rebuild our connection to the earth, fostering a future where humans and nature are in balance once again. So as you settle in for the night, think about the floating gardens. Think about the Aztecs' ability to adapt to their environment, their respect for the earth, and the community-driven nature of their agricultural system. The Chinampas are a story of human ingenuity, resilience, and sustainability. It's a story that's far from over. It's a story that's still unfolding, and we all have a part to play in it. The next time you see a garden or a patch of water, perhaps you'll remember the floating gardens of the Aztecs, the Chinampas, and the lessons they offer for a better, more sustainable future. And as you drift off to sleep, think about how we can all take a small piece of that wisdom and apply it to the world around us. As we come to the final section of our journey, it's time to take a slow, deep breath and reflect on everything we've learned about the Aztec floating gardens. Those remarkable chinampas that transformed a simple, watery landscape into a thriving agricultural system. The chinampas weren't just about feeding an empire. They were about creating balance with nature, sustaining communities, and demonstrating how human ingenuity can flourish in even the most challenging environments. The Aztecs, through their floating gardens, left us with not just a farming technique, but a timeless lesson about resilience, sustainability, and community. The remarkable thing about the chinampas is that they weren't just a product of their time. They were an answer to problems that are still very much with us today. In an age of rapid urbanization, climate change, and food insecurity, the principles behind the chinampas are more relevant than ever. The Aztecs figured out how to farm in a way that didn't deplete their resources, but worked in harmony with them. By creating these floating beds of fertility, they found a sustainable way to feed a growing population, all while maintaining a deep connection to the land and the water that nourished them. But the chinampas also offer a glimpse into the power of community. The success of the system wasn't just due to the brilliance of individual farmers. It was a collective effort. Families worked together to build and maintain the chinampas, and the bounty of the floating gardens was shared for the greater good of their society. This idea of working together for the benefit of all is a lesson that transcends time. In a world that can sometimes feel fragmented and divided, the chinampas remind us that true sustainability comes from cooperation, not competition. The lesson of the chinampas also lies in their adaptability. The Aztecs built these gardens to suit their specific needs. But the underlying principles, working with natural systems, being mindful of resources, and fostering collaboration, are universal. Today, we face challenges that may seem insurmountable. But the chinampas show us that solutions don't always have to be high-tech or complex. Sometimes, the answers are simpler, found in ancient practices that have stood the test of time. The ingenuity of the Aztecs in adapting their environment to meet their needs speaks to the resilience of humanity and the potential we have to solve the problems of tomorrow, today. And yet, the story of the chinampas isn't just one of triumph. It's a story of loss and rediscovery. The floating gardens once fed an empire, but over time, they were overtaken by the forces of history, colonization, urbanization, and modern farming practices. Yet, like the land they were built on, the chinampas never completely disappeared. Even today, efforts are underway to revive them, to restore the balance that the Aztecs once knew so well. These modern-day efforts are a tribute to the enduring legacy of the chinampas and a reminder that the wisdom of the past can still offer solutions for the present and the future. So, as you settle into sleep tonight, think about the floating gardens of the Aztecs. Picture the water, the reeds, the crops growing in perfect harmony with the lake. Imagine the community that worked together to nurture and protect the land. In many ways, the chinampas are a blueprint for the future, a reminder that the best solutions to the challenges we face might just lie in the ancient wisdom of those who came before us. As the world continues to change, the story of the chinampas shows us that even in the face of adversity, we have the power to adapt, to rebuild, and to create something lasting. Now, As the evening quiets and you relax, let the peaceful imagery of the Chinampus gently fade into your dreams. Feel the connection to the earth and the water, the calm of nature's rhythm, and the quiet resilience of the floating gardens that once fed an empire. Let that sense of harmony and balance carry you into a peaceful, restful sleep.